Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 236. Today, I'm excited to announce our interview with Jim Six, aka Pez, on world building, role playing, and video game creation. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Wow, I'm the impressed Jeffrey W. Ingram.
I am less impressed than most often, and I am Michael Miller. And we've got a special guest today. Mm-hmm. If you've ever heard us refer to Jim or Jim Six, or maybe just Six occasionally, we're referring to our good friend Jim, who lives out on the West Coast. And I actually drunkenly called Jim a couple nights ago. And we haven't spoken in quite a long time, so it was kind of silly that would have been the impetus for me to call him and reconnect. And he was kind enough to join us on the show today. So, Jim, thank you for being here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think when you refer to Six, you're actually referring to that character from Blossom back in there, that played by Jenna Von Oy.
Well, I don't. I know that you had a reason for the Six. I don't remember what it was.
I thought it was Blossom.
Was it Blossom?
That was my memory too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a. No, that's absolutely wrong. No. Well, we can't get into the reason for why it's Jim Six.
We can't. Oh,
no, right. Not for this.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So we are here covertly with Jim Six. Unlike most of our interviews, he has nothing that he's getting ready to launch, or he's not trying to, teach you anything. We're just here to BS with him. But all my friends have to be creative and they have to be smart, and Jim fills the criteria.
In space.
And has some interesting experiences and stuff along the way, which he will share if he wants to, and if not, it'll just be a great conversation.
I know there's been a couple of episodes where I've made reference to having role-playing tabletop experiences where I actually got so emotional I cried. That's not something that happened commonly. It happened once or twice, and Jim was the reason. Like a campaign that Jim ran, and it wasn't like it was a whole bunch of us. It was literally Jim as the game master and me. And it was intense. So that's one of the reasons I have a lot of respect for Jim as a storyteller, as a game master.
Yeah, that was the solo mage game we were running, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not the only thing that you've ever run. You've run what?
Well, let's see. Actually, I ran Jeff in a Middle Ages vampire campaign. This is before actually the source books came out for Middle Ages. What was it called? Dark Ages, right? Vampire Masquerade Dark Ages, right? Yes, this was before the source book for that came out, and it just kind of was something I felt like running, and I had to come up with a couple of sort of mechanical contrivances. Like, how do you handle Rot Shrek in a world where everything's illuminated by fire? So you have vampires freaking out constantly, which was a pretty easy thing. And I think Dark Ages may have handled it in a similar way, which is basically like lights don't count their background. They're like, they just fade into the noise of the background. And it's, if someone grabs a torch off a wall and shoves it in your face, then there's that Rot Shrek, check. But apart from that, if there's just a torch burning on the wall, it's just a light. It's not a threat. That was an interesting one. That had Pez show up again.
Mm-hmm. Pez is a character of Jim's.
If you look at my name on the chat that we're in right now, it's Pez.
I see that. It's Pez.
Pez was a character originally for a game that Jeff was running, who just because of the nature of him, he was a Malkavian and vampire, and his insanity was he thought he was a character in a role playing game, which was
he was like Deadpool before Deadpool.
Well, I mean, maybe contemporary with Deadpool, but yeah. Although I wasn't reading Deadpool at the time, and it was really he actually kind of got his name from someone else. So I think there was someone made reference to another character named Pez, and I just kind of like that name, and I made this guy like Pez Spencer, middle initial D, and then gave him this insanity that he was just this character in a role playing game, and it was sort of built on the idea that Malkavians have access to sort of a deeper truth in their insanity, and not just this isn't a theme unique to Vampire the Masquerade. This is something that comes up in discussions of insanity all the time. Like what is reality? What is the nature of madness? But I think there are many times when you have things like mad prophets and whatnot, where people kind of get this sense that maybe within the madness there is some access to a deeper truth, and so that's kind of where that's what Pez was sort of about. And so he had a silly name, Pez Dispenser, but he was the least crazy of all of you outside of the context of the game. Inside of the context of the game, he was mad, but he was right. If you just stepped outside of the game, he was just a character in a role-playing game. Sitting in Joel's kitchen while all you guys got to go hang out at the nightclub. And he was just sitting there at the table like he did every single time. But we had some really cool things with him. He had a really memorable exit from the campaign when the campaign finally came to a close. Jeff, you and I worked a lot on sort of working Pez's insanity into the story, and giving Pez access to information that I as a player had, because I rode in the same car as Jeff, our storyteller, and we'd go to this place and he'd tell me things, and I would tell the characters in the game. Pez would tell the characters in the game this like sort of insider information, but in the context of his madness. Like, hey, don't that guy you were talking to, like, I think he's a demon. You really don't want to talk to that guy. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? And I'd be like, no, Jeff was telling me. And then, who is Jeff? Would be the common refrain. And so, but he had a really cool exit from that campaign, where this is where like we had the werewolves were coming down, and everybody, there was this sort of confrontation between a group of werewolves and us as vampires, and he turned to everybody and he was like, "It's okay, guys, I got this." And I turned to Jeff and I'm like, "Okay," I shift into Krynos, and I go and walk over to the werewolves, and all the players were like, "What's going on?" And Jeff is like, "Yeah, he turns into this 9-foot tall werewolf." And they're like, "Wait, what?" And I turn around and I'm like, "It's okay, guys. I changed character sheets. It's cool. And I like walked off and escorted the werewolf menace sort of off the set. And that was his exiting moment.
So he's Nosferatu, like, or did you say Malkavian?
Yeah, he's Malkavian.
So he's Malkavian, but then becomes a werewolf.
Yeah, and he becomes a werewolf. And then, so in that medieval campaign, Pez came back in 900, 1,000 years earlier, and would constantly be confused about how it was now. Well, actually, later from now, which was actually before. Well, it's before because we played it like a few months ago, or it was last year, a few months ago. But now, obviously it's hundreds of years earlier now and hundreds of years later then. But that was actually earlier, like last year. And people would be like, "Wait, what?" Because he's talking from the simultaneous perspective of this character in a timeline, and also this player in a completely different timeline, in our timeline. So he was pretty neat. That's actually. I remember, Jeff, you might remember this a little bit too. I had a villain there. So I'd set up this world where I kind of wanted to come up with an in-game justification for the Magna Carta. So I had this idea, and this happens a lot. And I think, Jeff, you probably have mentioned it on the show. I'll take something that happened in reality, and it'll intrigue me, and I'll, maybe try to work something around it. And so, if you think about the Magna Carta, you've got a king with absolute power, and suddenly he cedes this power to this other, layer of nobility, sort of like cedes some of that power. And why would somebody with all the power, give that up? And the real reasons for it are, irrelevant as far as the Vampire King game was concerned. I decided it was because there had been this sort of like balance between the non-kindred nobility and kindred nobility. And so, the king was always human, was always non-kindred, he was always kind. And because he needed to be out in the day and do all these other things. And the vampires just got tired of it because they were more powerful. And so they just sort of forced him into this agreement to give them more power, because, they had this sort of supernatural power that allowed them to sort of press that advantage. But I brought you guys in, like I brought the players in, like Mike, you weren't in that game, right? You were not a player in that, right?
Michael, not sure.
I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to bait me into the whole thing I told you before the call.
Well, you did do it. So I'm still jumping on it. I don't remember that one specifically.
Yeah. I don't think you were in that.
No, I don't think I was in that one.
I mean, was that largely the same guys who played my vampire game before that?
It was, I think it was the Milwaukee guys. Yeah. Playing, right. Cause that, largely, cause we went from Milwaukee by night into this. Yeah. So it was you and, Joel's brother, who I don't remember the name of.
Tim and Matt.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, Matt was there. Yeah. And Tim and,
I don't remember Joel was there. I don't know.
No, Joel was not.
Matt, as in Matt Bannock, who was just recently on the show.
Yep. Yeah.
Both of them, actually.
Actually, Matt Bannock is the one who I think had the original Pez character.
Yes. Yes. It was Matthew had the original Pez character.
Yeah. Who was a werewolf, I think, originally. So,
and if I remember correctly, too, that might have been like one of the first things you leaked into the game through your character, was that you just got your name from him.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Probably. Yeah. He was very straightforward about like the fact that he was a construct.
Well, in a way, too, it worked out because it gave me as a game master someone to BS with about what's going on, because you get excited sometimes and you want to spill the beans, but it's kind of hard. And it kind of worked out because he made a good jester character, because he would do enough of it where there could be truth in what he was saying, but everything he said was not true.
Right.
So, it was up to the players to really, after a while you could say, well, some of it's right, but some of it's not right. And in a way, it really created a good Malkavian. Just because, like you said, it was this inner thing, just like this inner truth that he got to because of his insanity in the game.
Yeah.
And so it really worked out as a good jester character, and it made for a good NPC later on, because it's kind of the same role, except now it's all within the vest of the game master.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was, that was interesting. And then, Jeff, I remember you and I actually ran a game together.
Yes, I remember. I don't remember actually running it. I remember planning it out. I don't remember it actually running.
No, we ran it. We ran it at Joel's again.
That was the table available.
Yep. And no, we did run it. We didn't run a lot of it. It was San Francisco. It was set in San Francisco. I remember I did a big piece of the sort of what that scenario was. So we didn't really run off of like source books or things like that. We always sort of preferred to, or I did.
Well, there wasn't one for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was some information in, I think, some of the books on the Sabbat about like how they controlled California and things like that. And none of that we paid any attention to. We just kind of used like, well, there's this big giant park in the middle of this city. What's it doing there? Obviously that's a werewolf stronghold, because how how else could this intensely urban area, be filled with trees? And we said the same thing about the Park Presidio up on the north side as well. I think you always like to put mummies in.
Yes, I was a big fan of the Mummy source book. I liked their magic. It was very powerful, but because of the numbers, not.
Yeah. We ran that. We co-ran that, which was weird. I do remember. You might remember this a little bit. You were running something with them, and I think they were in a pawn shop, looking to get something. Who knows? Whatever. They were after one MacGuffin or another, and I think it was the pacing was just a little bit, and so I just had like a bunch of people come in and rob the place in the middle of them talking, just like completely unplanned, like non sequitur, just to shake things up, which surprised you, of course, because you didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen, and so we had like a little 10-minute action sequence, and then moved on, and I think got the energy a little bit back on track. Yeah. So I've run a few things.
From a build standpoint, do you want to talk to Jim about some of the questions that we would normally ask in interview, or do you want me to just generate some inquiries?
Well, I think we're just going to sort of play this one more by ear, sort of talk about world building for a second. So, Jim, why don't you give us a bit of theory about how you go about like world building? How do you come up with the scenario? Do you have a plan for world building? How do you work that part of it?
Yeah. So I actually like to specifically here in the context of role playing, right? And a little bit in the context of video games as well, because I do video game design as well. But particularly in tabletop role playing, when you're playing, you're having sort of a conversation with all of your players. And so what I like to do is scatter things throughout, the world that I have. So I have sort of like, I like to come up with some major influences in the world. Like, what is the state of the world that we're in? What is the sort of foundation like? Where are we? What is the sort of like, who holds the power? Potentially, like, how did they get that way? Like, how do the people who hold the power get in power? How do they hold on to that power? And what are the sort of like points of interest? And I like to have some systems in place that the players may never ever see a lot of the stuff and a lot of the detail that goes into a world. This happens in a lot of cases. So I also do some creative writing, and this is something my writing partner and I talk about a lot. And it's something that I encourage like designers who worked for me to do as well. When you're telling a story, like, you should know probably a lot more detail than your players ever need to know. So even if you're intending to tell a story through just little snippets of environmental storytelling, like the fact that a bar has a theme, and that theme is you guys hate so it's haikus. There you go. You hate haikus. So like there's a haiku bar in this world, and and it's like, what is that all about? And like little random elements and things like that go to color a world. If that's how you're intending to tell your story, it's important for you to know what the entire scenario is. So you build out the entire world, as much of it as you need to understand. And so you may have this very detailed, intricate sort of overview of like, what is the plot and the story of everything that's happened. Okay, well, in the late 1600s, this family came, out to this town, and they did this, and then, their children went off to these places and they did these things, and et cetera, et cetera. And you build this whole like big backstory and everything. And you don't necessarily need to tell the players that any of that stuff, but you use that framework to ensure that the things you do tell your players are hanging off of something very cohesive. And there is a kind of ambient verisimilitude that comes from a broad, detailed understanding of the world that you've built. So when you say, oh yeah, there's a bar here and it's the haiku bar, your players go, yeah, that actually makes sense. They may not know why it makes sense. Like in my scenario now, it doesn't make any sense because I haven't set up any backstory. But when you have players, encounter something, they kind of get it and they understand, like, wait a minute, yeah, this makes sense. Like it's not strange that there's a bar themed for haikus. And it's because you did all the legwork beforehand, like, and you build up all the backstory. And so as you keep showing people pieces of the world, they hang together, and things that seem incongruous later they can figure out, like, wait, no, that actually fits into place. Now I get why it fits into place, and those kinds of things. Which is sort of a long-winded way of saying, I like to kind of think about things at the macro level, the high level, figure out sort of what the themes of the world are, and then start going a little bit down into a couple of key details here and there. And then if it's a world that you're exploring in tabletop, letting your players pick and choose the points of interest that seem to matter to them. Because it's no fun to railroad somebody into your story about the haiku bar when none of your players really care at all about the haiku bar. They don't care about whatever clever thing it is that you came up with to make this stupid thing make sense. To them, it's just this dumb concept that doesn't fit into a world, and you just let it go. You let it go, and you move on with it. I guess it's more about running the game than it is about building. But the point being that you want to have enough of a tight enough sort of weave in your tapestry to have everything hang together, but you want to be able to like leave things open ended and let people add their own story to it. So I don't know.
Well, that reminded me of Kim talked about that when we were working on our collaborative setting together, San Francisco by night.
Yeah.
And because I think we're both very similar in that kind of approach, where it's like we want the big picture stuff, and then you kind of build down into the set where the people are playing it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I remember we were like shooting ideas off, and I was like, because it was like a free city and the rest of the state was like all spot or something like that.
Yeah.
We decided to make it like a free city there. And I remember it was like, this guy really is going to need to have an iron fist. And I think you were like, yeah, but it can't look like an iron fist. So it's like covered in platinum.
Yeah, that's right. The platinum fist. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what we called it, right? The platinum fist. He's got a platinum fist. Yeah. And it was about ruling. It was also about ruling through wealth and appearances. Because the prince of that city, right? He lived up in the rich neighborhood where where Robin Williams lived when he was alive, and where his family lives. I think he was he a venture? No, he was I'm trying to think what clan he was.
I think he was Toreador.
Yeah, he was a Toreador. He was one of the artist clans. Yeah, exactly. Not typically known for their power struggles. Yeah. And that's sort of what that was. And it was this idea that you give this illusion that you're in this place that doesn't have, that has looser rules and that everybody's free to do whatever. And this is come here if you want to get away from the oppression of, what surrounds us. Come join our oppression here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come join us here. And
sort of our brave new world.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And I remember too, because world building for Earth is a little different, just in the concept that there are real anchors that you can directly pull stuff from. And I remember, actually, I think we bought like a guidebook to San Francisco, and it was like San Francisco by Night. So I think it was the exact name of it. And I think we were amused by the name, so we bought it. But maybe that's just my false memory going back in time. But we were going through picking out landmarks.
Yeah.
And stuff for where we wanted essentially the set pieces to be. Yep. And not knowing, like I said, where they would do what at, but what do we think are some interesting things that would, because you're always looking for stuff that's going to kind of pop and catch their attention when you put effort into building something.
Even if it's painfully obvious. I think we put we used the Transamerica building for the center of power for the mummy, right? It's the pyramid building that we used. We put the mummy in it. So a little on the nose there, but that's fine. It's also like, how else do you explain, a pyramid being built in the middle of a city? Clearly it's a mummy.
It's a mummy.
Yeah.
And he was the money man, and you don't screw with the money man.
Yep.
That was one of the themes, I believe. But I remember like I don't know if it was like right after or a couple of years after, you had actually gone out to visit a friend in San Francisco, and so you had sort of the unique pleasure of going there. I think if you had a budget, you would go to a place to get the themes to bring back with you. But we had a little guidebook with a paragraph on places.
Yeah.
We're completely going off inspiration from like a couple sentences, and so he got to go out and see some of our ideas were kind of very similar to what was there, or sometimes completely different. But you got to experience it backwards.
Oh yeah, and I mean way off, right? Like, certainly the idea of San Francisco, I think, was shaped when we were working on it. Was shaped by my familiarity more with Los Angeles and New York or Boston. Mm-hmm. And San Francisco is not a town like that. San Francisco is often referred to as like the most European city in the United States, which is, what does that mean? But having visited at least one European city, like I kind of get that sense of it. And other people who have come over, we had people who lived in Europe come over and visit San Francisco, and like they definitely all noticed like, oh wait, this city feels different than San Jose or Los Angeles or something like that. So there's a very different vibe, and so that thing I was saying earlier, like, oh, this intensely urban city that has this park in the middle of it. I'm thinking Central Park in New York. And really, it's not like that. I mean, in San Francisco,
Central Park is pretty unique, though, in that it is so physically large. Like most parks in cities are nowhere. There are cities smaller than Central Park.
Oh yeah. And the sort of interesting thing here is Golden Gate Park is actually larger than Central Park.
Is it really?
Yeah. And it's got a sort of a different footprint. It's very rectangular. It's much more rectangular. It's thinner, longer and thinner than Central Park. But Central Park is surrounded by quite tall buildings. And that's really not the case even remotely in San Francisco. Like in San Francisco, the buildings in that area, Central Park stretches between the Richmond and the Sunset. Those are the districts. The Sunset is called the Sunset because it touches the ocean it touches the coast where the sun sets. And the Richmond is named after somebody who owned all the area at the time. But the park runs in this big, wide, east-west strip, and it's just a few blocks north to south. And we're talking like smaller residential style blocks, not big city blocks, not like New York City, avenue to avenue blocks. But it's surrounded, like the buildings that surround it are, maybe 5 stories at like the tall ones, like 5-story buildings. And, there's stucco and there's a lot of like color in these buildings. Like there are a lot of like interesting color schemes in San Francisco. You get buildings that are pink that people live in. They're painted in pastel pinks and blues and plenty of white and beige, as well. But there's a very different feel. And so I think,
you don't see a lot of pastel buildings in New York.
Yeah. Unless you got to like Astoria.
Well, of course. Yeah. There are a few out there, but
yeah,
mostly it's just the colors of the stone.
Yeah. Was it brick or was it cement? Like,
was it gray? Was it gray? Was it tan? Was it red brick?
Yeah.
And that's about it.
And then glass. And right.
Glass.
Those are the 3
Steel.
colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing that being there, like I don't think I necessarily would have put I would have had that same sense of like, this is a natural stronghold for werewolves. Like I think honestly, probably changelings would have come to mind more because
having been there, you mean?
Yeah, because the hate backs into the park, and it goes from the ocean to the hate if you go east to west, and the hate is Haight-Ashbury, so that's like the famous hippie scene of the 60s and the free love era, and
so the free love place is called the Haight.
Yeah, it's Haight, Haight, but yeah.
Still funny.
Yeah, a little bit. So it definitely wouldn't have been like, oh, this is definitely the place for werewolves. It feels like a weird place, and people hang out there, and it feels very different when you're there in person. So in some ways it's nice to. You want to reference things that are in the real world. You want to reference things that are real and use them as like jumping off points. But replicating the real world isn't necessarily, what the goal of anything is. It's all about a take. Like if you're building a world, it's about what you don't do as much as what you do, right? So
getting back to themes, like I don't know what you had in mind for the campaign that you ran. For me, when I think about that campaign, I think about loss. Obviously, the technocracy was a driving force throughout the entirety of that story. So what immediately comes to mind is like loss. Torture's a strong word, but not too far off the mark.
No, there was a whole like
there was some little literal torture in there, but my character kept losing things, losing family members, losing his lifestyle, losing his way. So there was a lot of loss for that character. Is that something that you had consciously in mind as a theme when you created that? And if not, when you create a campaign or you have an idea for a story that you're going to do tabletop wise, what is a decider in creating a theme for it?
Yeah. So, I've got to say, like, I think settling on that, the theme of loss. So loss is definitely a big part of what was in your like it started with your sister's like kidnapping, right?
I think it started with the parents getting killed, no? Or was that after the fact? I'm trying to think of which happened first, because I know the parents dying was very fast.
Yeah, and it's not really a driving for, like, there's nothing for you to do after that necessarily. I mean, vengeance, but
yeah, fine. I don't remember how they died. It's been so long.
Yeah. But trying to retrieve your sister and all of that was the sort of the drive. What what I kind of wanted was, I don't know if loss was the theme I was thinking of at the time. I think it stems from the theme that was actually there, which is about sort of recognizing the power that you have, but also the limits of the power that you have. So, we start with you, realizing your character realizing they're a mage in a kind of a abrupt way, where your avatar literally manifests in like you got two manifestations of your avatar, and one that tries to seduce you into embracing magic, literally embracing the magic, and then one that just tries to like beat the revelation into you. And
such a weird, because for those of you that don't play or have never tried the game Mage, it's different than a lot of tabletop games, even ones within the same system. So like, Vampire and Werewolf, like these are all sister games in the same realm, but Mage always felt very different to me. And certainly very much so because I got it through the guise of you. I had played the game before, but I loved your approach. Yeah. And within Mage, like when you're using the word avatar, we also use the word avatar, but usually when we're using that word, we're talking about a customer, the person you're targeting with your fiction. And in this case, it's quite literally within the context of the game. It's a version of your character's consciousness.
Yeah, it's that magical piece of them. It's that there. And I took some liberties with it. Like I had your avatars literally manifest, and I think that's pretty unusual.
Wasn't there 3? As I remember correctly?
Yeah, there was a third one. There was a third one.
It was very primal, right?
Yep, the big primal, I think molten sluggy.
I was going to say slug. I seem to remember a big slug-like creature. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but that was because like you had this sort of very chaotic connection to the magic, and we this world stems around what you want to do with your character. Like, so I've heard Jeff talk about you bringing your own sense of creativity and things like that to the podcast, but also to the world. And it's one of the things that I've actually called out a couple of times. I've mentioned to you, like, when we had this idea of like having a game, I'd come home and I'd like watch TV. I'd be like smoke a cigarette or whatever, and then like you'd come home and you'd have this yellow legal pad where you'd scribbled like 6 pages of background information on your character on the subway, coming home, and you'd be like, so I was doing all this work, and he was like, so I wrote this thing, and like, here, read this, and like, you give me this big story and backstory. And so I was able to really tailor a lot of that to sort of the things that you were kind of hinting at and looking for and like talking about, and maybe not the things that you said. Like, I don't think you said like, I'd really like to be in a situation where I just get the shit kicked out of me over and over again.
That's usually a request for most players.
Yeah. But
the irony of that pattern repeating itself in a lot of characters I've made, though.
Yeah. So and that's the thing. Like, so that's something that I did very specifically sort of for you. So it was about power, and it was about like recognizing your power, recognize the limits of your power. Like, you were super outmatched in like most situations.
Which is ironic considering how accelerated his power growth was.
Oh yeah. Exactly. And so it was about this like sense of like, I'm very powerful, but even though I'm very powerful, like I still have to recognize that
I'm nothing.
I'm not the most powerful thing around. Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of that going on, and you losing all the time and all of that. That's not, that is not a hallmark of how I like to run games. Like one thing I tell people when I run is like, I will not kill your character. I will let you get your character killed, but if you want to do something incredibly stupid, I will probably warn you, because I want everybody to keep going. But I'm not going to kill you. Like I don't,
You allowed
I
me
don't
grace on a couple of things I remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, I don't see my job. I didn't see my job running a game as being like, to kill you as players. Like that's as far as I'm concerned, that's not the job of a good game master. Opinions vary. So, because I remember like the first D&D game that I ever played, and I think I only played D&D one time or maybe two times, but it was basically all about that. It was the DM had decided it was his job to kill everyone, which is on its face kind of an absurd thing, because the DM has all of the power in literally all the power in that world. And it doesn't matter what dice you roll, the DM can just make some shit up that just overcomes it anyway. You're like, well, I'm going to roll to attack and I get this. And they're like, yeah, you didn't get anywhere near the AC of this thing because its AC is 28,000. And you're like, okay, that's literally impossible. They're like, oh, well, boom, you're dead. Like, clearly that can't be the goal of the dungeon master is, to take the ultimate power.
If it was, it would not be very long games.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd lose all your players quickly.
Yeah. And so, the game masters are given ultimate power not to kill the players, but also, and not to just dump huge rewards on them. This ultimate power is given to the game master for the purpose of entertaining the players and making sure that they have a good time. It's the reason you're allowed to ratchet up the difficulty or step down the difficulty or have serendipitous moments occur or deus ex machinas occur, which can be kind of crude. But the reason you are given the power to have this kind of blunt, I don't know exactly what I'm saying. So let me step it back just slightly. The reason that game masters are given this incredible amount of power is so they can keep the players in that zone that the players want to be in. And if that zone is, feeling like they're winning, then that means that, that power is there to apply pressure and then let the players overcome. In your case, if the player seems to want to lose, then it's about saying, oh, here's something you can do, and having you go for it, and then having it overwhelm you. Like a little bit at a time, not just like suddenly overwhelming, but having it like, oh, I can do this. Okay, wait a minute, it's harder. Okay, wait a minute, it's harder. Wait, it's even, and then just being like, oh, I just keep like, I can't overcome this thing. And then having you back off. Because that wasn't, I don't know that there was a plot, but that wasn't what that game was about, right? Sometimes adventures in these games are about the plot, right? It's about, running through the steps, like pulling off the heist or whatever it is that you're doing. And that can be really fun for people, and they like it. They like a good dungeon crawl where it's just like, I just want to like fight some stuff and get some random cool rewards, and that's nice. I'm less interested in running things like that. I'm more interested in character interactions and experiences and letting people sort of like feel what's going on. I prefer rules light role-playing games to rules heavy. Although there's a balance there, right? Like some games are so rules light that it's actually hard for people to play, which seems counterintuitive. But if you think about Mage, which is very different than a lot of the games, think about the magic system in Mage. You're given these like spheres of influence and levels of mastery over them. And that's it. That's the magic system. It's like, you don't get a spell called, like Phantom Fist, or like, you don't get any of those things that you get in a lot of games. You don't have something like transmute living matter, like to, or like metal to wood or whatever it is, like unlock door or knock or whatever it happens to be, like light or like all these spells that you get in something like Dungeons and Dragons, which is very interesting because they can build these complex spells and they have these side effects and these limits and whatever. And you can pour through the spell book and be like, oh, I want this thing. It's really cool. The rules that are there and the systems that are there are pretty neat for beginning players. For something like Mage is not a beginner's, I don't think it's a beginner's role-playing game because it is so open. When you're confronted with that locked door in other games, you need the spell unlock door or you need a fireball, to get through the door. Like, well, I don't have fireball and I don't have unlock door. So
destroy door.
Yeah. And, and in Mage, you could do the fireball, and you'll get punished for it because there's that, reality not being happy with you, bending it too far. But, the incredible amounts of flexibility, like rusting out the lock mechanism, by applying a little bit of, a little bit of entropy, a little bit of time, or, using mind and time and correspondence to go back and make the person who locked the door originally forget to have locked the door. Like, that's a valid approach to a locked door, is like, oh, yeah, guess what? It isn't locked after all. They forgot to lock it because you went back in time and caused them to forget to lock the door. That kind of really immensely freeform magic inside the system, because there are rules for it, can be very hard to wrap your head around when you're first playing. And you get this, you can get this like analysis paralysis. You can get the, like the paralysis of free choice, right? You've got so many options. You have no idea what to do. Yeah. So although I like, typically I like, rules light gaming, it's all basically there to serve sort of interactions between characters and players that are not just mechanical interactions. So this is why I liked, playing as Pez. This is why I liked setting up the political structures in the Middle Ages, the campaign that we had going in Vampire. It's for those amazing moments where, I realized I had screwed up. I had built an artifact for one of our players, and I had made it. So I had made this artifact. I made this sword that was like inadvertently so powerful in a particular context I hadn't considered. Jeff, your character and the main protagonist / antagonist in the story, Rowan, who is this ghoul,
which I liked. I liked that idea that it wasn't a vampire.
Yeah, he was a ghoul who had all this power, and he was in charge of you guys, the Black Knights, who were working for John while Richard was away, and I had given Tim's character this artifact, this sword that could reduce the blood pool of a vampire. That was its like special effect. It could do some aggravated damage and reduce blood pool, which against a bunch of vampires is it's powerful, but okay. Rowan and your character Jeff, just like, first of all, nobody liked Rowan, and you didn't like Rowan,
no,
and you didn't like the power. Nobody liked the power structure they were under. Nobody liked any of this stuff,
which in a way spoke to England at that time.
Yeah, and all of this was great. Like, I don't mean you as players didn't like the character Rowan. Like, the characters didn't like Rowan, and this was just the power dynamic they were in, and Tim's character got upset, and he used his special artifact sword and he struck Rowan with it, at which point I realized I had made a huge mistake because Rowan was a ghoul who was incredibly old and was entirely sustained by blood. Like, there was no part of him that was alive anymore. He should have died centuries earlier, which is how he managed to get himself into this position of power. You know, like he'd been around for a long time. He'd been working the system a really long time. And so, you know, we roll some dice and the attack succeeds and Rowan's blood pool goes down. And I'd already like established sort of where his blood pool was at that time. And he just starts to desiccate in front of there. So like, here's my main guy, my main antagonist, protagonist, who's in charge of everything, starting to just desiccate in front of everyone. And I'm like, well, I might need to come up with a new driving force behind this game. And, you know, and that, Jeff, that's when your character...
This is Poen, his twin brother.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's when Jeff, like, you know, because we had really worked on, like, Jeff had this sense of honor and duty, and you know, during that when we were playing the campaign, like that, those were the knobs I kept turning on that character. Those were the buttons I kept pushing, was like your duty to the kingdom and your sense of duty. And I remember I still kind of remember the look on your face as you're just like, oh my God. And you're like, all right, I open a vein and I feed this guy. And I was like, yes. I was like, he's like, I got to, he's our, you know, like, I have this responsibility and obligation. And you end up saving the guy who probably disliked him the most. Yeah. End up saving him out of this sense of obligation. And those are the moments that are there. And that happens because, you know, we establish like what the roles are in the world, what the rules of the world are, and what the relationships are. And those are the moments that are interesting for me to play. And hopefully they're interesting for other players as well. Like, not just you, because you chose to do it, Jeff, but also the other players who were there. You know, Tim seeing his attack succeed, followed by you bringing this guy back. I'm sure he must have been thinking, well, great. What's Rowan going to do to me now? Yeah. I thought I was in the clear for a second there, but
okay, I'm going to have to cut it off here, and we're going to come back for one more episode 237, part 2. We'll get more into the importance of audience for role-playing games, for creating, and the big stuff from Jim, really, which is his experience in creating video games and how people who, if they want to go that path, can actually get started. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.